A chill mist curls through the narrow cobblestone streets, weaving in and out of crooked timber houses like a living thing. It carries the scent of wet earth and burning hearths, of charred wood and the faint tang of human fear. Every breath feels thick and heavy, as if the air itself conspires to weigh down the soul. Children clutch the hems of their mother's skirts, their small hands trembling, eyes wide with terror. They speak in whispers, barely audible over the sigh of the wind. Tales of witches who steal the soul with a shadowed glance, of spirits that twist the night air with unseen claws. The mist snakes along the streets, curling into corners where the light of torches cannot reach, filling the spaces between walls and roofs with uncertainty, as though the village itself were breathing in dread. In the great hall, the Lord Steward sits hunched over a rusted iron key, turning it slowly in his palm. The metal is cold and biting, leaving marks in his skin as if it remembers every deed it has unlocked, every chest of secrets it has guarded. Outside, the blacksmith's hammer rings sharply against the anvil, its rhythm echoing through the village like a heartbeat warning of fate. Each clang resonates against stone and timber, a sound both familiar and ominous. The villagers listen, instinctively measuring each sound, each flicker of movement, against the invisible forces that they believe govern their lives. A dropped bucket, a misaligned shoe, a sudden cough, each is a potential sign, a signal from the unseen. Fear here is not abstract. It is tangible, woven into the texture of daily life, as binding as the king's writ. Candles gutter in the windows of the houses, their trembling light casting grotesque, crawling shadows. Shadows that stretch long across the uneven walls, bending at impossible angles, whispering of unseen presences. At the toll of the lone chapel bell, villagers cross themselves, murmuring prayers that rise like smoke to an indifferent sky. The bell's echo falls across the mist, deep and sonorous, a comfort and a warning intertwined. Every sound carries significance here. Every silence does too. The village seems to exist in a delicate balance, as if a single misstep might tear open a fissure into the unknown. A woman hums softly, rocking a child in her arms, her song trembling like a thread against the weight of the night. The melody is older than the stones, older than the village itself. It carries a prayer, a plea, a shield woven from sound. Outside, the wind moves through the streets like a restless spirit, bending saplings and rattling shutters, carrying the faint scent of damp soil, smoke, and distant forests where wolves tread silently beneath the canopy. Somewhere a dog growls low, hair bristling, sensing that the night holds more than just cold and fog. And high above, a raven circles in silent vigil, black wings blotting out the moonlight, pausing to watch the village below, as if it too were counting souls. Everywhere, superstition is law. The villagers live as if fate were a tangible force, twisting around each life, ready to punish the careless. A newborn's cry is not merely a sign of hunger. It might attract spirits or summon curses. A broken wheel is not a misfortune, but an omen. Even the humblest gestures are laden with meaning. The steward's eyes flicker to the flickering fire, aware that his actions in this hall are weighed not just by men, but by unseen eyes. Every key turned, every seal broken, every ledger opened is an act performed under the quiet, relentless scrutiny of superstition. The streets are quiet now, except for the soft creak of timber, the rustle of straw mats, and the occasional cough carried on the wind. Even the blacksmith pauses, hammer raised midair, listening. A stray stone rattles down an alley, and every head turns as if some invisible threat had been unleashed. Shadows gather in corners and beneath arches, forming shapes that seem alive. Mothers pull children closer, whispering reminders of prayers and charms pinned to cloaks, amulets tied to wrists, stones lay beneath beds. These rituals, small and silent, form a lattice of protection across the village, fragile yet absolute. In the great hall, the steward shifts, the key still in his hand. Outside, smoke curls from chimneys, a ribbon of light gray against the dark sky. The wind carries it through alleys and across rooftops, tangling it with mist. The blacksmith resumes his hammering, the sound now less a heartbeat, more a drum of warning. Somewhere, a floorboard creaks under the weight of a careful footstep. Somewhere else, a shutter slams in the wind, and a lantern wavers, throwing light across walls like moving specters. It is the rhythm of life in this village, a rhythm of tension, of anticipation, of dread. In one house, a boy huddles beneath a table, eyes wide. His sister whispers a prayer into his ear, fingers gripping his sleeve. He trembles not just from the cold, but from the stories he has heard, from the shadows that seem to creep with intention. Every step outside the threshold feels dangerous. Every glance outside the window is a negotiation with fate. The villagers have learned that caution is survival, that superstition is strategy. They cross themselves before entering the forest, before touching water, before lighting a fire. Their lives are a tapestry of ritual, each thread carefully woven against the dark. The steward lifts his gaze to the hall ceiling, where beams are etched with age and smoke. He remembers tales of past winters, of plagues and famines, of lords betrayed and villages punished. Every stone in this hall, every key, every beam, carries the memory of what happened when rituals were ignored, when caution faltered. His fingers tighten on the rusted iron, and for a moment, he feels the weight of history pressing down upon him, a weight invisible but undeniable. Outside, the raven glides on a silent wind, wings outstretched, black against the silvered moon. It watches as villagers move between torchlight and shadow, each step calculated, each gesture careful. It pauses atop a twisted branch, observing, before lifting once more, carried by the chill mist that seeps through the village like a living breath. Its shadow drifts across walls, across roofs, across hearts already heavy with fear, a reminder that the night does not forgive, that the unseen is patient, and that fate moves quietly, inexorably. Every night is a meditation on survival. Villagers whisper to one another in low tones, exchanging news, sharing omens, recounting signs and portents. A burnt field is not merely a disaster, it is a warning. A broken cartwheel is not merely accident, it is a message. Even the wind, the rain, and the fog are read, interpreted, woven into the tapestry of vigilance. And yet, life continues. Children are fed, bread is baked, fires are lit. Each act of ordinary survival is an act of defiance against the darkness that seeks to infiltrate every shadow. In the hall, the steward stands at a window, looking out. Smoke rises from chimneys, mingling with mist. Torches flare, their light dancing across cobblestones slick with rain. Shadows twist unnaturally, forming shapes that whisper of unseen presences. Somewhere, a bell tolls, its sound rolling across the village like a reminder that time moves forward, that fate is patient, and that even as the village sleeps, the world beyond its borders remains dangerous and alive. A woman rocks her child in a window seat, her song rising softly into the night. The lullaby is an ancient shield, a prayer carried on a fragile thread of melody. It is a promise of safety, fleeting but sincere, against a darkness that cannot be named. The wind rustles the trees outside, rattles the shutters, carries the faint scent of distant forests, of damp earth, and of fire. A dog growls somewhere, low and guttural, sensing what human eyes cannot. And above it all, the raven circles once more, black wings cutting through the mist like a sentinel of fate. Superstition governs the village as surely as any lord or king. The villagers live with constant vigilance, every gesture and word carefully measured. Even kindness is weighed against consequences. Even laughter is careful, measured, and fleeting. They carry charms, whisper prayers, avoid forbidden paths, and honor every ritual that promises protection. Life is a series of negotiations with invisible powers, and every day survived is a small triumph against chaos and fate. The mist thickens, curling into every alley, seeping under doors and through the cracks in walls. Candles gutter, flames flicker, shadows twist unnaturally. The steward closes his eyes, feeling the weight of history, of fear, of duty. Somewhere, a bell tolls again. Somewhere, the blacksmith pauses, hammer poised. Somewhere, a child shivers under a blanket. And somewhere beyond sight and sound, the unseen moves quietly, inexorably, threading its presence into the hearts and minds of all who dwell here. The night stretches on, heavy and oppressive. Every breath tastes of mist and smoke. Every shadow seems to move with purpose. And yet, the village endures. Each candle lit, each prayer whispered, each charm pinned, each ritual observed, holds the darkness at bay for a little while longer. Even as the mist curls and the raven glides above, even as the blacksmith hammer sounds like a heartbeat warning of fate, the villagers persist. Fear is constant, but so too is courage. Hope is fragile, but it exists. And within that fragile hope, life continues, delicate as flame, enduring as stone. And as the night closes in, thick with unease, the question lingers over every roof, every alley, every trembling heart. Which shadows are merely cast by flickering fire, and which are cast by hands unseen? The answer remains uncertain, a whisper in the mist, a promise of the unseen to be revealed in time. The morning fog lies thick across the market square, swallowing wooden stalls and cobblestone streets in a gray, suffocating embrace. Each timbered roof, each thatched corner, emerges slowly from the mist, as if the village itself is breathing, alive and cautious. The air is damp and cold, pressing against the skin, settling in the marrow, carrying with it the smell of wet straw, smoke, and a faint, iron-tinged scent that makes hearts tighten in quiet alarm. Merchants move like shadows among shadows, faces pale, eyes darting, voices low, carrying rumors as fragile as mist. The miller's son, they say, has been cursed. Pale-cheeked, hands trembling, he shuffles through the square, unable to meet the gazes of those who watch him with suspicion. Every whispered word about sin and unseen spirits seems to cling to his skin, pressing invisibly at his shoulders, and in the trembling of his hands, the villagers read the shape of fate itself. A woman tends her herb stall with the precision of someone who has lived too long among fear. The bundles of sage, rosemary, and juniper lie heavy, their scent a bitter armor against the unseen. She lifts a sprig of rosemary, crushes it between her fingers, and the aroma rises like smoke from a tiny flame, curling into the fog, into the awareness of everyone nearby. Children peer from behind skirts, clutching iron charms shaped into rings and crosses, small talismans pressed against their breasts, as if their very heartbeat might summon protection. Mothers whisper blessings and incantations over their livestock, over the goats and chickens that cluck and fidget in wooden pens, crossing themselves in rhythm with the repeated words, as though the sound alone could keep spirits at bay. The square is alive with this tense vigilance, each movement deliberate, each glance calculated, each breath a negotiation with forces that cannot be seen but are felt in every creaking rafter, every shadow stretching too long. The stone chapel rises at the far edge of the square, dark and frost-kissed. Its heavy doors groan as the priest swings the thurible in slow, solemn arcs, the incense smoke twisting upward in serpentine spirals, vanishing only to reform in the corners where candlelight fails. The villagers kneel in rigid lines, hands pressed to lips, eyes lowered, each inhale a fragile prayer. The smell of burning incense is sharp, bitter, and protective, a fragile shield against wrath that may dwell in the gaps between the stones. Every shadow within the chapel seems to pulse with life, as if waiting, listening. The priest's voice, low and rhythmic, threads through the silence, calling saints who have long ceased to answer, drawing on their memory to guard the faithful. The cobblestones are slick with frost, each footstep a careful negotiation. The creak of cartwheels echoes, a warning, a reminder that superstition governs all, and that joy can be dangerous. A laugh, a single careless laugh, would ripple through the village like a pebble dropped into deep water, drawing attention from forces that inhabit corners and walls. And yet, small rebellions persist. A child dares to chase the stray black cat that slinks along the edges of the square, its fur blending with shadow, eyes molten gold catching the early light. Omens are read in the cat's movements. Silence is the safest ally. From the market, the wind snakes through alleyways and along rooftops, carrying whispers older than memory. It presses against the skin, moving through hair, under cloaks, and along collars like invisible fingers. Stories drift on its breath. Villagers lost to misfortune, bargains struck with the unseen, nights when screams echoed over hills and rivers, unanswered prayers that became warnings. Each home, each stall, each stone bears witness to these stories, etched into the village like scars and flesh. Even the simplest choices, bread bought, water drawn, the tending of a fire, are weighted with consequence. Fate seems to linger in the fog itself, touching everyone indiscriminately, reminding all who walk the square that life is fragile. By mid-morning, the fog lifts just enough to reveal flickers of color. The red of a cloak, the yellow of a hay bundle, the muted blue of a merchant's tunic. The blacksmith hammers at the forge, sparks rising like captured stars, and the clang of iron on iron cuts through the murmur of the market. Breath clouds in the chill, each strike of the hammer a defiance against the dread pressing in from every corner. Villagers watch from doorways, holding their children close, crossing themselves with rapid fingers. The market persists despite superstition, a small, fragile testament to survival. In narrow alleys, whispers coil like smoke. Two women speak in low tones, glancing over shoulders as they exchange news. The miller's son wandered too far into the forest at dusk, a dark figure watching from between the oaks. Fear clings to their voices, as if the wind itself might carry the words to eyes that dwell in shadows. They clutch charms to their breasts, the scent of crushed herbs lingering on their fingers, and move quickly into the square, counting steps, crossing thresholds as if each movement might avert calamity. The black cat appears again, slinking between stalls, silent and vigilant, watching, always watching. The sun dips lower, pale and weak, casting long shadows across the square. Stalls empty, carts are folded and stored, merchants retreating to homes lit by the dim flicker of tallow candles. The chill deepens, creeping into bones and hearts alike. A dog growls in the distance, unseen, its echo sharp against the stone walls, stirring tension that already runs through the village like a river under ice. Shadows lengthen, reaching for the living, and the mist gathers again, circling timber and stone, as though the world itself inhales in anticipation of nightfall. In the chapel, candles gutter, their flames trembling against the draught. The priest moves with measured steps, muttering prayers, tracing symbols over the faithful who kneel in silence. Smoke rises in thicker columns, curling along the ceiling, pooling near rafters. Shadows dance across walls, elongated and alive, and the villagers' eyes flick from flame to flame, searching for omens, for protection, for proof that their prayers are heard. Even the most devout feel the weight of the unseen pressing in, a quiet insistence that the world beyond these stones is watching. Evening settles like a soft, inevitable hand, the village steeped in the kind of quiet that is louder than any voice. The wind returns, threading through rafters and chimneys, carrying scents of smoke, frost, and wet earth, whispering secrets of days long past. Every sound is amplified, the shuffle of boots, the creak of timber, the breath of a child held close. A lone crow circles overhead, its cry slicing through the silence, a reminder of forces that dwell beyond the square, beyond the village, beyond comprehension. By nightfall, doors are bolted, windows shuttered. Families huddle by hearths, whispering prayers to keep the darkness at bay. Outside, the black cat prowls between shadows, a sentinel moving unnoticed. Smoke curls from chimneys, mingling with the mist, a defiance against the invisible, pressing dark. Somewhere, the miller's son lies awake, eyes wide in the candlelight, wondering if morning will bring relief or a repetition of fear. The wind carries one final whisper before it dies, stories of loss, bargains, shadows, and survival. Life is fragile, every choice a thread in a web of ruin or salvation. Even the smallest acts, a step taken, a word spoken, a hearth tended, hold power. And as the village sleeps, bound in fear and fragile hope, the morning fog waits, patient and persistent, ready to reclaim the square, to turn the familiar into the haunted, and to remind all who dwell here that the world is never entirely their own. The night deepens. Shadows stretch across doorways and walls, forming shapes that might belong to spirits or only to imagination. A lone candle flickers in a window, casting the faint outline of a figure kneeling in prayer. Somewhere, a cart shifts with a groan, breaking the silence, and a chill runs down the spine of a passerby, though they are safely indoors. Even the air feels weighted, heavy with anticipation, as if the village itself holds its breath. Dreams come thin and restless in these homes, weaving through the minds of the young and old alike. The miller's son dreams of the forest, of dark figures moving between twisted oaks, of whispers curling around his ears like smoke. The mother dreams of fires unlit, of children lost, of the village swallowed by fog. The blacksmith dreams of sparks that fly upward and never die, illuminating shadowed forms that stare, silent and waiting. And the village, caught in the stillness between dusk and dawn, drifts through these collective dreams, suspended between fear and hope, between what has been and what may come. Outside, the fog thickens once more, curling along rooftops, sliding down chimneys, swallowing the square in silence. Only the faintest flickers of candlelight remain, struggling against the cold, gray tide. The wind rises again, carrying the scent of smoke, of frost, of earth that remembers every footstep, every whispered prayer, every misstep that brought sorrow before. Life, fragile and trembling, waits. The unseen moves between the stones, between the hearts of the villagers, reminding them with every creak, every sigh, every shadow, that no choice is without consequence. And so the village sleeps under the watchful fog, each soul bound by fear and devotion, by the knowledge that survival is a negotiation with forces they cannot name, cannot see, but can feel. The day has closed, but the story has only just begun. The first light of dawn creeps like molten gold over the jagged edge of the forest, spilling down into the village like a hesitant visitor. Frost-laced spiderwebs cling to every branch, delicate filaments glittering as if the trees themselves have wept overnight. Each thread shivers in the cold, catching the weak morning sun, and the dew that clings to them glimmers like frozen tears suspended between worlds. The forest beyond the hamlet is dense and ancient, dark with secrets older than memory. From within its shadowed depths come murmurs the villagers have long learned to heed, soft rustlings that speak of spirits, of things neither fully present nor absent. In the narrow lanes, mothers press their children to their chests, whispering prayers with lips blue from the cold. Saints guard you, they murmur, their voices trembling in the thin morning air. Keep the fairies from your dreams. Keep the demons from your bones. They rock the infants gently, feeling the quick, fragile pulse of life against the certainty of the forest's watchfulness. These woods, for generations, have been neither friend nor enemy, only a threshold between the seen and the unseen. Here, to walk too far is to risk the touch of shadow that can take a life or twist a soul. Smoke curls from chimneys, thick and sweet with the scent of peat, mingling with the acrid tang of wet earth, livestock, and the metallic bite of the village well. It drifts lazily through the air, a wisp of warmth in the cold, carrying with it the invisible weight of vigilance. To breathe is to be reminded that life is fragile, and that each day survived is a small victory. The blacksmith's hammer rises and falls, each strike ringing sharp and rhythmic, echoing across the village like a heartbeat or a ward against the encroaching unknown. Each swing is deliberate, each spark cast like a prayer in iron. A young girl stands by the edge of the field, her breath a cloud in the frigid air. Her eyes do not linger on the morning frost, but on the gallows at the far edge, looming over the wheat fields. The rope sways gently in the wind, a pendulum of judgment, a grim reminder of misfortune's swift hand. The girl's mind drifts to those who have hung there before, faces pale in the dawn, eyes wide with the last recognition of their fate. She imagines the creak of the rope under their weight, the hollow sound of it against the wood, the final, fleeting flutter of life, and shivers. Even at her young age, she knows that superstition and death are neighbors here, often inseparable. Villagers move about cautiously, carrying charms, tokens, and talismans, small pieces of bone, knotted string, silver coins, or carved wood, each believed to guard against spirits that drift between the realms. A shepherd knots a string around his wrist. A woman hangs a silver pendant from the hearth beam. Some carry pieces of iron, twisted into crude shapes, while others burn small bundles of herbs meant to repel the unseen. These are not mere gestures. They are survival, a language older than memory, repeated and refined through countless generations. The blacksmith pauses, wipes sweat from his brow, and examines a newly forged iron pendant. Its surface is cold, yet warm with intention, a small armor for whoever wears it. Shadows stretch unnaturally beneath the thatched roofs, folding into themselves, whispering secrets that the villagers pretend not to hear. The wind carries sighs that sound almost human, brushing against ears like fingers. A dog growls softly behind a fence, and for a moment, everyone freezes, aware that some things are too small, too quick, too cunning to be noticed. Every glance over the shoulder is a prayer. Every tightened hand around a knife is reassurance. The forest has eyes, the night has ears, and the spirits that wander between them are patient. From the chapel tower, the bell tolls, deep and sonorous. Its vibrations travel across the fields, down lanes, through the forest, and into the hearts of those who dwell here. Each chime is believed to hold the restless dead at bay, to remind them that the living still hold dominion over a world otherwise prone to chaos. The villagers pause as the sound washes over them. Children count the tolls on fingers small and cold, watching the light shift in the frost, sensing without understanding the rhythm of protection and fear. As the sun climbs higher, the village comes alive in careful motion. Women sweep the streets, tend fires, feed animals, and check charms. Men repair fences, sharpen blades, and lift buckets of water from the communal well. Children chase one another across fields of frost-hardened grass, their laughter sharp in the air, but even it carries an edge of caution. All around, there is a quiet, unspoken agreement. Life must be lived with one eye on the ordinary, the other on the extraordinary. Survival here is both mundane and supernatural. The blacksmith continues his work, the hammer ringing like a mantra. Sparks leap into the morning mist, dancing briefly before fading. Each strike is a declaration, an acknowledgement that the village refuses to be consumed by the forest or the unseen. At the edge of the hamlet, a hunter sharpens his spear, eyes glinting with suspicion. Every branch snapped underfoot makes his heart skip. Every crow's call sets his teeth on edge. The forest may hold game, but also holds judgment. Those who enter unprepared rarely return unchanged. By afternoon, the hamlet is a choreography of vigilance. Women stir pots, men garments, and speak in low tones to one another, sharing news and warnings. Men haul timber, check traps, and patrol the perimeters. Even in the quietest moments, the air hums with tension. The wind carries voices, real or imagined, from the forest, and each sound is parsed for meaning. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the low groan of the earth settling. Every heartbeat is a measure of life held against uncertainty. As the sun dips behind the forest, shadows lengthen and darken unnaturally. The villagers move with deliberate care, drawing heavy cloth across windows, locking doors, and lighting small clay lanterns. Candles are placed in niches and windowsills, flickering like tiny stars against the encroaching black. Inside homes, families whisper prayers, recounting stories of ancestors, of victories against spirits, of lives lost to misfortune. Rituals unfold, some long forgotten, others precise in action, each serving to fortify the thin line between safety and chaos. The young girl, now at home, watches the gallows again. The rope sways, indifferent, patient, a pendulum measuring fear and the inevitability of loss. Her mother places a hand on her shoulder, murmuring blessings, speaking of protection, yet the girl feels the weight of history and superstition pressing down. Around them, the village hums with quiet readiness. The smell of smoke and peat is thick, comforting, and cautionary. The blacksmith's hammer slows, then rises again, a signal that the fight against the unseen is never done. Night settles fully, and the forest becomes an ocean of shadows. The wind carries its own voice, a chorus of whispers, rustling leaves, and distant calls of predators. Smoke from hearths winds through the darkness, connecting homes, hearts, and lives. Within this fragile circle, the villagers persist, holding the line between day and night, life and death, seen and unseen. Every creak of timber, every flicker of candle, is both a warning and a shield. The first stars appear, cold and distant, witnessing the resilience of the hamlet below. The villagers, though small and vulnerable against the weight of history, ritual, and fear, endure. The young girl lies in bed, clutching her bone charm, listening to the faint chorus of the village settling into night. Somewhere deep in the forest, shapes move that she cannot name, and yet she knows that courage, fleeting and fragile, is enough to face them. Silence falls, not as peace, but as tension held taut. The village is poised between worlds, a heartbeat between shadow and flame. The forest watches, the night listens, and the villagers, alive, aware, and unbowed, remain, performing their quiet defiance in the hope that the unseen may yet respect them. In this delicate space, life persists, fear persists, and the story of the hamlet continues, woven from frost, smoke, shadows, and the indomitable will to endure. Rain hammers against the slate roofs of the manor, a relentless drumbeat that shakes the stone walls and rattles the windows in their iron frames. Each drop falls with a rhythm older than memory, drumming through corridors that seem to stretch into shadow and silence. The house itself feels alive, breathing in the storm, exhaling the damp chill through its drafty halls. There's a pulse to this place, a heartbeat that thrums through the timbers, vibrating beneath the soles of the servant girl's bare feet as she moves cautiously across the cold flagstones. Her hands are slick with soap, a sheen that glints in the flickering torchlight, but it is not cleanliness she fears. It is imperfection. Each drop she spills, each step that falters, is a summons to calamity, a signal that unseen eyes have taken note. She has been taught since birth that superstition is not folly, it is survival. The whispers of ancestors, of spirits that linger in corners and crawl through cracks, shape the rhythm of her life. She traces a line along the dusty floor, fingers dragging slowly, deliberately, each mark a ward against misfortune. The torches along the walls flicker, flames bending and quivering in the gusts that howl through the hallways, throwing the portraits of long-dead ancestors into brief, terrifying animation. She pauses before a particularly grim-faced portrait, the painted eyes of the Lord staring down, as if weighing her soul. She swallows, whispers a quiet prayer, and moves on. Behind heavy doors, the lords and ladies of the manor whisper in low, urgent tones. Crows circle thrice above the hill, black against the slate-gray sky, and every movement in the storm carries portent. Broken mirrors, bells tolling at midnight, drafts that shift inexplicably through the halls. These are not coincidences. They are signs. She shivers, feeling the weight of their fear pressing down on her shoulders, as tangible as the stone beneath her feet. Outside, the wind tears at the lattice windows, rattling them so violently that the candle flames bend and flicker like terrified dancers. The storm seems to speak in a language only half understood, carrying the faint echoes of village prayers, the distant crack of thunder, the groan of trees bent to their breaking point. Somewhere beyond the hills, the village sleeps uneasily, their whispered entreaties rising into the night as if they might reach the heavens and hold the tempest at bay. The girl's pulse quickens. Each breath she takes seems to carry a taste of the rain, the smoke, the tension of the night. She knows that the house will test her patience, her courage, her careful adherence to the ancient rules that govern these walls. A single candle on a mantel flickers in the draft, smoke curling like a serpent toward the ceiling. She kneels before it, tracing a cross in the dust with trembling fingers. The smoke twists and bends, curling down toward her as though observing, acknowledging, perhaps even approving her ritual. She whispers a prayer under her breath, words taught by a grandmother who had whispered them under the same stormy skies. It is not faith that drives her. It is fear, an intimate, ever-present fear that life and death are separated by the fragile thread of obedience to these ancient rites. Every sound in the house carries meaning. The drip of water from the eaves becomes a metronome of warning. The creak of a floorboard underfoot could be a ghost sigh. Shadows stretch across walls and corners, shapes dancing with intention, forming and dissolving in the candlelight. The girl moves through this haunted cathedral of stone and timber, acutely aware that she is never alone. The house is patient, observant, and it remembers. The walls hold centuries of whispered secrets, of fears spoken aloud and unspoken, of lives ended too soon because a sign was ignored, a ritual skipped, a warning dismissed. The great hall is vast, its ceilings soaring above, carved beams dark with age and smoke. A bell tolls in the distance. Midnight. The sound reverberates through the manor like a knell, making the girl's heart stutter in its chest. Behind tapestries and heavy wooden doors, The nobility whispers about omens with gravity, each voice thick with superstition. A crow perched just beyond the battlements, a mirror cracked by chance, a sudden gust that snuffs out a candle. These are interpreted as signs from forces beyond comprehension, forces that dictate the rhythm of life in this house. The girl shivers, pressing her hands together in quiet supplication. The storm outside intensifies, lashing the manor with wind and rain, forcing her to lean into the hallways, into the shadows, where the flickering torchlight barely penetrates the gloom. The wind carries the scent of wet earth, of burning tallow, of distant fires. Somewhere in the village, prayers continue, rising into the storm, tiny voices in defiance of a violent world. Her fingers grip the broom handle tightly, knuckles white, as she moves with deliberate precision, each footstep a prayer, each gesture a ward. She knows that the line between caution and disaster is as thin as the edge of a blade, and she treads it with care. A shadow moves in the corner of her vision. It is fleeting, almost imagined, yet it makes her pulse leap. Was it the draft? Or something more deliberate, more aware, something that watches from the edges of the storm-soaked night? She cannot tell. Fear settles in her chest like a stone. She whispers another incantation, more urgent now, words of protection passed down through generations. The wind swirls in response, or so it seems, and for a heartbeat, she feels the house itself acknowledge her vigilance. Lightning strikes, a jagged burst illuminating the hall in stark white. For a moment, the ancestors' portraits appear alive, their painted eyes following, judging, warning. The girl's shadow stretches long across the floor, merging with theirs. She pauses, her breath held, realizing how small she is, how fragile her life seems in comparison to the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. And yet, she moves on, a ritual in motion, each step measured, deliberate, a dance of survival. In a remote corner of the hall, a door creaks open, revealing a chamber dimly lit by torches whose flames shiver against the drafts. She slips inside, closing it behind her, feeling the sudden intimacy of the small room. The air smells of damp stone and old parchment, of dust and secrets that have lingered for decades. This room is forbidden in theory, yet irresistible in practice, a library of whispers, of memories, of unspoken warnings. She moves forward, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, knowing the house observes even as her pulse races. Before her stand a cracked mirror, its surface warped and imperfect. Her reflection wavers, ghostly, mocking her caution, reminding her that vigilance alone may not be enough. She reaches out, fingers brushing the cold wood of the frame, and the mirror seems to ripple, a faint echo of the storm outside captured within its fractured surface. She kneels again, whispers a prayer, crosses herself, and steps back. Superstition here is not merely habit. It is armor, a fragile but necessary defense against forces she can feel but cannot see. The manor itself is alive, responding to the storm and to the careful rituals of those within. The walls groan under the weight of wind and rain. The roof leaks in a dozen small, persistent streams, and the drafts carry the scent of rain-soaked fields beyond the hill. Each sound, each movement, each flicker of flame carries meaning. The girl moves like a shadow, careful, wary, blending with the history of the house, a small participant in its ancient story. Through the latticed windows, lightning illuminates the landscape, revealing the desolate hills, the twisting trees, the darkened village below. The storm is a living entity, thrashing, testing, punishing the unwary. The girl knows her life is bound to these rhythms, to the careful interpretation of signs, to the protection offered by old prayers, incantations, and gestures. She kneels one last time before the candle, smoke coiling in serpentine spirals, and whispers gratitude for small mercies, for safety, for the knowledge that the storm will pass, and that the house, for all its stern judgment, has spared her this night. The candle flickers low, casting dancing shadows across the walls and floor, shadows that seem to shift into forms of serpents, reaching fingers, or perhaps the long-buried faces of ancestors. She rises slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of light and shadow. The wind sighs through the rafters, echoing the distant murmur of village prayers, the tolling of the midnight bell, the crack of thunder in the hills. Her hand rests on the wooden door, pausing, listening. The house exhales, the storm continues its relentless symphony, and she steps forward, moving into the night with quiet courage, guided by fear, by faith, and by the fragile thread of superstition that separates survival from ruin. The manor breathes around her, alive with centuries of memory, warnings, and silent judgment. Every creak of timber, every gust of wind, every shadowed corner holds meaning. The storm has not yet passed, and neither has the house finished its watch. She moves onward, a small figure against the weight of stone and rain, navigating a world shaped by superstition, by fear, by the invisible hands of those who came before. And in the depths of the night, as the candle smoke curls into the dark, she feels the pulse of the storm, the heartbeat of the manor, and the unbroken rhythm of life, belief, and survival that will carry her into the next day. At the edge of a forest that had whispered secrets long before men learned to read or write, the monastery stood like a sentinel frozen in time. Its gray stones, slick with moss and darkened by centuries of wind and rain, absorbed the damp chill of the morning mist. Every archway and battlement seemed carved from the memory of storms, from frost and fire, as though the monastery itself remembered every footstep, every whispered prayer, every shadow that dared linger too long in its halls. Mist coiled around the roofs like slow, patient smoke, thickening in the courtyards and among the hedges, wrapping the walls in a veil that softened edges and blurred reality. The air was alive with silence, a heavy, almost suffocating silence, broken only by the faint drip of water from eaves, the distant howl of a fox threading through bracken, or the hollow toll of the bell. Each peal was more than sound. It was a heartbeat, echoing through stone corridors, through the marrow of every monk, every novice, and every visitor who dared cross its gates. That toll carried a warning, a protection, a promise that while the forest outside waited with patient hunger, inside the monastery the fragile balance of order and devotion was maintained with vigilance and fear. Within the cloistered halls, monks moved like shadows, spectral figures in heavy robes brushing against flagstones that had felt the weight of centuries. The soft scrape of fabric, the measured cadence of their steps, seemed a ritual in itself, each movement designed to disturb neither the dust of history nor the whispers of the unseen. Candlelight flickered against stone walls and parchment, tremulous and alive, illuminating ancient manuscripts that were as much warning as wisdom. These texts were filled with psalms and prayers, yes, but intertwined among them were accounts of demons glimpsed in corners, omens inscribed by trembling hands, and objects cursed beyond human comprehension. Here, faith and fear were inseparable, braided together in ink and prayer, each word a thread in a tapestry of vigilance. In the herb garden, young novices moved with trembling hands, tending the rue, belladonna, sage, and thyme, each plant believed to harbor the essence of sins past. One novice paused, knelt by a patch of rue, and inhaled the bitter, green aroma, which mingled with the dampness of soil and the smoke of distant clay stoves. He shivered, though the morning was not yet cold. The wind whispered through the arches overhead, curling like fingers around his shoulders, stirring an awareness that the world beyond the walls was alive, patient, and waiting. He murmured a prayer, not fully certain whether it was for protection or penance, and then returned to his task, heart hammering with the knowledge that mistakes, even small ones, could carry consequences far beyond the scope of comprehension. The forest loomed outside the walls like a vast, watchful entity. Its blackened trunks rose like sentinels, roots twisting beneath the soil in patterns that mirrored the veins of the monastery's ancient stones. Moss and ivy climbed toward the sky, and mist clung to every branch as though the trees themselves exhaled slowly, deliberately. It was a place where the forest seemed to remember everything: loss, betrayal, hunger, and where the thin line between the living and the spectral could blur at any moment. The gates of the monastery were barred, reinforced with iron and etched with sigils. Wards hung from nails hammered deep into stone, humming faintly in the mist, warding against the wandering spirits that sought to exploit human neglect or weakness. Inside, life was a careful balance of routine, prayer, and fear. In the scriptorium, the eldest monk bent over his desk, the firelight illuminating his lined face and the slow, deliberate motion of his quill. His eyes were pale, reflective pools that had seen decades of devotion and dread. He wrote not only to preserve knowledge, but to remind those who came after him that the monastery was a threshold, a fragile point between sanctity and chaos. Every page carried a warning and a prayer. To live in faith was to survive, and to ignore tradition was to invite calamity. The novices learned quickly. They moved in pairs through corridors, carrying water, tending plants, or sweeping stone floors, their eyes cast downward, avoiding the corners where shadows seemed too thick, too deliberate. One novice paused mid-step, sensing a figure, or perhaps a memory, pressing against the threshold of vision. The wind hissed through a slit in the stone, brushing against his cheek with the sharpness of warning. He whispered a prayer, half chant, half supplication, and pressed on, heart pounding, aware that fear was both companion and teacher here. At night, the monastery became a world of flickering lights and living shadows. Candles guttered in sconces, their flames bending and bowing to drafts, sending long, liquid shadows across walls and manuscripts. The novices moved carefully, carrying their small lamps through corridors whose stones remembered every footstep and every secret. Somewhere, the bell tolled again, softer now, almost hesitant, but its echo carried through every arch, every chamber, leaving behind a vibration that trembled in the chest. The refectory smelled of stale ale, boiled cabbage, and wax, a mixture at once comforting and oppressive. Long tables gleamed dully in candlelight as monks ate in silence, each bite a ritual, each swallow a measure of endurance. Even in such mundane acts, the lessons of fear and respect persisted. Eyes sometimes flicked toward the window, toward the forest, where the wind pressed against the panes, bringing with it the faint cries of unseen creatures. One monk, lifting his head slightly, remembered an elder's words. Even the air outside carries the memory of what has been lost. And in that memory, even bread and broth became laden with meaning, with caution, with reverence. In the upper chambers, the eldest monk moved slowly, relying on a carved staff to guide his steps. He paused by a narrow window, looking out over the mist-laden forest, recalling the monastery as it had been in his youth, new, bright, filled with the sound of hope and laughter. Now, each stone, each arch, each incense-stained corner was heavy with history, reverence, and fear. He whispered to himself, almost unconsciously, "The world beyond these walls is relentless. Here we keep vigil. We keep the boundary where the boundary keeps us." His voice, though quiet, seemed to resonate through the stones, a declaration and a warning in equal measure. Outside, the forest pressed close, shadows bending and stretching, roots twisting under moss like the hands of something waiting. A fox cried somewhere, sharp and lamenting, and the wind carried the sound along corridors and into the chambers. The novices felt the weight of this world pressing upon them with every breath. They moved deliberately, speaking rarely, understanding that misstep or lapse could invite forces unseen. Even their most innocent actions were measured, their devotion intertwined with fear, their very survival dependent on respect for powers they could neither see nor fully comprehend. Rituals marked each moment. Before dawn, the novices chanted softly, a low, trembling sound weaving through stone corridors, blending with the hiss of candles and the whisper of wind through arches. Each chant, each motion, each act of care, watering herbs, tending fire, sweeping floors, was both devotion and defense. Even small mistakes could carry consequences, for the monastery was alive in ways that went beyond the corporeal. Its stones remembered, its walls spoke, its shadows watched. The mist lifted only slightly at noon, revealing courtyards slick with rain, hedges twisted and tangled with age, and walls that had weathered centuries. The sun pierced the fog in weak, trembling shafts of light, illuminating the gleam of wet leaves and flagstones. The novices worked through this half-light, aware that the forest beyond was patient and hungry, its presence a constant reminder that life was precarious, that devotion was survival, that vigilance was not merely recommended but required. As night approached again, the monastery took on its most spectral form. Shadows lengthened, flickering candlelight danced against walls, and silence pressed down with the weight of centuries. The air seemed to pulse with unseen life, brushing past the novices and monks alike, reminding them of everything they could not see. In the scriptorium, an elder's hand traced letters across a page, fingers trembling slightly, aware that each word carried a charge, a warning, a prayer. And when the first pale light of dawn touched the tops of the ancient trees, curling silver strands into the mist, the monastery exhaled with the forest, a single organism breathing slowly, carefully, in rhythm with the unseen. The novices gathered for morning prayer, eyes lowered, hearts pounding with the memory of fear and devotion alike. Candles flickered in the scriptorium, illuminating pages that spoke of angels and demons, curses and blessings, sins and redemption. And in that quiet, suspended world, one question lingered. How thin is the line between sanctity and ruin, and who watches when vigilance falters? Here, in this place of stone, shadow, and prayer, life was a careful negotiation. Every footstep, every chant, every tremor of the wind mattered. The monastery was not merely home. It was guardian, teacher, and warning. To live here was to accept that devotion alone was insufficient without fear, that every act carried consequence, that the unseen world demanded respect. And those who learned this truth, those who moved carefully between light and shadow, prayer and terror, found themselves living in a world as fragile as a candle flame in the mist, yet as enduring as the stones themselves. The castle's towers clawed at the gray sky, jagged spires like blackened teeth gnawing at the clouds. Each stone seemed to hum with memory, an echo of lives long spent in fear and in obedience. The walls were heavy with history, thick with the weight of oaths and betrayals, victories won and lives lost, and every surface carried the faint trace of sorrow and whispered secrets. Courtiers moved with measured precision, their footsteps a soft percussion against cold flagstones, eyes constantly darting to corners where shadows lingered, watching, waiting. Servants moved even more cautiously, gliding silently through halls, carrying trays of steaming broth, loaves of bread, or pitchers of wine, aware that even the smallest misstep could bring whispers, suspicion, or worse. The kitchens were alive in a chaotic rhythm, a pulse of warmth and smoke that seemed almost defiant against the cold, oppressive stone of the keep. Meat hung from hooks above smoldering fires, fat dripping into pans with a hiss and a sizzle, mingling with the acrid tang of spilled ale that had soaked into cracks over decades. The air smelled of iron, fire, and the faint tang of fear that clung to so many who had passed through these halls. A seamstress paused mid-stitch, her needle poised over linen, fingers trembling. She recalled the tales murmured by older hands, garments sewn under moonlight, carrying curses or madness, binding their wearers to fates unseen. Each thread she pulled felt like a delicate negotiation with forces that no mortal could fully understand. She whispered a prayer, not to any known saint, but to the thin line between night and dawn, hoping her craft would remain her own and not a vehicle for some darker will. Beyond the kitchens, the corridors were colder, the air thick with damp stone and the lingering echo of footsteps that had long since faded. Servants crossed themselves at archways, wary of spirits said to linger where blood had been spilled. Some said that the walls absorbed the very essence of violence, that every cry of pain, every whispered betrayal, left an imprint on the stone. And perhaps it was true. The chill that ran along the spine in these corridors, the sudden flicker of shadow, could convince even the most rational mind that the unseen world was never far. The wind outside did not merely blow, it prowled, rattling banners like dry bones, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves on the moor. Their cries were not simply animal sounds. They were warnings, the voice of a wilderness that had not yet been tamed, a reminder that the castle, for all its stone and steel, was not a sanctuary but a bastion against chaos. Above, a raven circled the keep, black wings slicing the pale morning light. Its presence was read with equal parts fear and reverence. To see it land upon a turret was to know that omens were at play, that the air itself held judgments beyond the comprehension of men. Some whispered that the raven's eyes saw more than they should, that it carried messages from the past into the present, and that its silence was heavier than any word. Knights prepared for the day with solemn ritual. Each stroke of polishing cloth over metal was precise, a silent vow to survive, to honor, and to protect. Talismans hung from belts, charms meant to shield from injury, from death, from the unseen forces believed to stalk the battlefield and the hallways alike. They did not speak of fear, for it was a weakness to be hidden, but they prayed in quiet moments, hands pressed against chainmail, heads bowed over crosses, hearts reciting invocations older than any kingdom. Even the young pages absorbed the gravity of this existence, learning that courage was not measured in battle alone, but in silence, in vigilance, in the understanding that one misstep could invite ruin. Children moved more cautiously than adults, their laughter rare and measured, never loud enough to disturb the shadows. Told never to mock candlelight, never to scoff at the shifting patterns of stone and shadow, they understood early that whimsy could draw unwanted attention. The walls of the castle were alive, they were told, with memory, with spirit, with consequences. Every corner might conceal eyes that never blinked. Every shadow might conceal a presence older and wiser than themselves. Even in play, children mimicked the rituals of survival. Bows, silent greetings, careful steps around the stones that seemed to hum beneath their feet. The day's rhythm was a measured symphony of light, sound, and movement. Courtiers met in quiet chambers, plotting and whispering, while the servants' work stretched endlessly through the castle. The clang of iron from the armory echoed against stone walls. The dull thump of boots on flagstones created a background heartbeat, and the occasional scream of a startled animal in the yard added tension to the air. Meals were no less ritualized. A spilled goblet, a misplaced knife could be read as omens. Superstition was not mere belief. It was survival, the subtle law governing all life within the castle. Dusk fell in a violet haze, draping towers in melancholy. The castle exhaled, the day's frantic rhythm slowing into a tense, watchful quiet. Wind swept through battlements, rattling the last banners clinging to their poles. Smoke from fires twisted through the air, carrying with it the scent of damp stone, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of hemlock from the distant moor. Silence grew heavy, pressing against ears and skin alike. Every inhabitant felt it, the weight of being watched, of sharing life with unseen eyes, of inhabiting a world alive with memory and omens. Shadows lengthened inside the halls, stretching across floors and walls, merging with the figures moving cautiously through the corridors. A young page lingered near a doorway, eyes wide, imagining whispers that spoke in riddles, twisting intentions into peril. He felt the chill of centuries in the stone beneath his fingers, the weight of lives long departed pressing upon him. A servant knelt in silent prayer, murmuring for protection against forces both visible and unseen, aware that every breath might draw attention, that every heartbeat might echo beyond the reach of mortal understanding. Outside, the raven returned, settling on a parapet under the dimming light of dusk. Its black eyes caught the last traces of the sun, reflecting an eternity beyond comprehension. It was a reminder, both subtle and inexorable, that the castle was a nexus of past, present, and unseen futures. Wolves stirred on the edges of the forest, their calls rising and falling like a chorus of vigilance and hunger, a sound older than any stone, older than the oldest legend whispered in the halls. Night deepened, and the castle embraced the darkness with a solemn, enduring breath. Torches flickered, shadows twisting and merging into forms indistinguishable from memory. The wind became a chorus of sighs and whispers, carrying the stories of those long gone, of oaths made and broken, of lives spent in devotion and fear. Each heartbeat was conscious, each breath measured. The living understood that they were never alone, that the walls remembered, and that the night held truths and judgments beyond their understanding. In chambers, quiet rituals unfolded. Hands crossed in prayer, lips murmuring invocations to saints long forgotten, eyes closed in hope against fate, hearts clutching charms and talismans. There was no ceremony in these gestures, only the desperate need for protection against forces unseen, the instinctive acknowledgement that survival was more than skill or bravery. It was recognition, respect, and appeasement of the invisible. The castle itself seemed to pulse in agreement, responding to the rhythm of devotion, echoing with shadows that danced like memories along the walls. Even in the sleeping hours, the castle never rested. Its stones held history like a pulse beneath skin, a subtle hum that vibrated with the lives of all who had lived and died within its walls. Each tower, each turret, each arrow slit seemed to watch, to wait, to remind the living that the balance of fear and faith was never static. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the same rituals, the same vigilance, the same careful negotiation with shadows and memory. But tonight, the world belonged to the quiet, to the unseen, to the whispering winds, and to the ever-watchful raven that circled the darkened keep. The castle slept, yet its consciousness lingered, heavy and unblinking, aware of each breath, each thought, each flicker of light. In the distance, wolves called again, a lullaby of caution and survival, and the wind carried these sounds into every chamber, every hall, every shadowed recess. And so life continued, fragile and measured, under the watch of eyes that never blinked, of shadows that remembered, and of stones that spoke silently of fear, faith, and the tenuous thread by which all existence here was bound. Above it all, the raven lifted into the star-pierced sky, a black silhouette against eternity, carrying the promise of vigilance, the reminder of unseen judgment, and the eternal balance of fear and faith. Below, the castle exhaled into the night, aware of the delicate dance it would demand once again at dawn. The living, the faithful, the wary, all shared this intricate choreography, caught between stone and shadow, between superstition and survival, between fear and hope, in a world that never truly slept. A thin fog clings stubbornly to the winding paths of the hamlet, curling around the ruts in the mud, clinging to boots and skirts alike. The first pale light of dawn stretches lazily over the horizon, ghostly and tentative, brushing the crooked timber roofs with a chill silver sheen. Every breath carries the heavy scent of wet straw and churned earth, an aroma that seeps into bones, cold and unrelenting. The ground squelches beneath the weight of feet, a reminder that life here is measured in toil, mud, and the quiet endurance of superstition. From the depths of this gray morning emerges a wooden cart, its wheels groaning against the uneven path, its lone traveler leaning into the handles, muscles taut, face lined with worry and the habitual caution of one who knows the eyes that follow. Whispers drift like smoke along the streets. Strangers who step unbidden on a sacred soil summon misfortune, and even a fleeting glance toward the unseen can call it forth. Chickens scatter with frantic clucks at the peddler's approach, their feathers catching the dew like fragments of wet parchment. The goat tethered to a crooked post stretches its neck toward him and bleats as if in warning, the sound sharp against the soft rhythm of fog and wind. Each creature moves as though aware of the invisible tally of omens and portents that mark the day. Inside the timber cottages, smoke rises in gentle spirals from low hearths, bringing the scent of burning twigs and dried herbs to mingle with the ever-present dampness. Women kneel on rough wooden boards, grinding roots, leaves, and berries into powders and pastes. Rue, thyme, rue again, finger-stained green, their motions both precise and trembling with devotion. Every pinch is a ward against envy, sickness, ill-favored fortune. Every whispered incantation a prayer to the unseen forces that dictate survival. Children are taught early to carry charms, to avoid stepping on cracks, to sprinkle salt behind a friend's shoulder after a stumble, lest the shadow cling and the misfortune follow. In this village, superstition is not an indulgence, but a map for living, a line of defense against a world that offers no mercy and no guarantees. The bell in the church tower tolls, low and resonant, echoing across the mist-laden fields. Its vibrations thread through the cottages, the courtyards, and the narrow lanes, as though the sound itself marks the fragile heartbeat of the world between the living and the unseen. Each strike reverberates against the peddler's chest, a dull drumbeat of remembrance and warning. He pauses at the crossroads, where three mud-slick paths meet, feeling the iron of his tools cold against his palms. Heavy, unyielding, a weight beyond the metal itself, a tangible reminder of the eyes that never close. Ancestors long gone, spirits of the forest, watchers of thresholds. He tilts his head toward the sky. Crows wheel overhead, black against gray, their wings slicing the fog with a precision that unnerves him. He wonders, as he always does, if they are watchers, messengers, or merely creatures of the earth, and whether his own gaze pierces them in return. By mid-morning, the fog begins to thin, but the chill lingers, pressing damp and gray against the skin. Smoke curls in twisting columns from chimney tops, merging with the remaining mist, creating an illusion of a village afloat on clouds of ash and herb. Villagers move slowly, deliberately, careful in every gesture, measured in the etiquette of superstition. A child drops a crumb of bread, murmuring the charm learned from a mother's lips. A woman sweeps the threshold of her door, muttering words that carry protection. Every glance carries judgment. Every movement is weighed against unseen eyes. The peddler's cart squeaks and groans, asserting its presence amid this quiet, cautious ritual. He is necessary, yet foreign, a bearer of goods, and yet a bearer of potential misfortune. His role is both accepted and feared. Without him, the village economy falters. With him, a subtle tension permeates every step, every word, every look exchanged. The air grows heavier as the day stretches. A faint wind curls along the paths, bringing with it the scent of distant rain and damp leaves. The mud clings stubbornly to boots and wheels alike, each step a negotiation with the earth. The peddler pauses at another crossroads, where the forest begins to encroach upon the cultivated fields. Shadows lengthen unnaturally in the thinning light. He senses them, not just the shapes of trees, not just the darkening sky, but the weight of all that has been, the accumulated fear and reverence of generations. Here, superstition is not idle. It shapes the very way the villagers step, speak, and breathe. He tightens his grip on the cart, feeling the cold of the iron tools through his palms, and lifts, pushes, and moves forward as if each step is a measured prayer, a negotiation with forces older than memory. By afternoon, the hamlet hums with quiet life, each act layered with ritual. Women wash linen in tubs of water, stirring the suds with repeated gestures that are as much charm as chore. Children chase one another along the lanes, their laughter tentative, careful not to break the invisible pattern of protection laid over the day. The peddler's goods are displayed on his cart, bundles of cloth, sharp-edged tools, dried spices, but they are more than merchandise. They are symbols of exchange, trust, and survival. A misstep, a harsh word, a glance left unchecked can alter the balance. He moves from door to door, aware of every whispered eye upon him, feeling both the obligation and the peril of his presence. The bell strikes again in the late afternoon, slower now, heavier with meaning, signaling both warning and promise. Shadows deepen across the village, stretching long and uneven in the fading light. Lanterns are lit one by one, small flames winking against the gray, smoke from hearths rising to mingle with the last breaths of fog. The villagers brace themselves as night approaches, aware that darkness is not merely absence of light, but a presence, alive and watchful. Every shifting shadow, every rustle in the leaves, every movement of the crows above is a whisper of potential misfortune, a signal of unseen attention. Superstition is not a story told to children here. It is the architecture of existence, the invisible scaffold on which life is balanced and measured. As evening settles, the peddler reaches the edge of the forest, where the path narrows and the mud gives way to looser soil, scattered leaves, and the scent of damp moss. A soft wind lifts the fog from the lowlands, carrying it into the trees, where it curls and coils among branches thick with shadow. He pauses, the cart resting against his shoulder, and feels the weight of centuries pressing down, not from the soil, but from memory itself. The crows circle again, their cries punctuating the silence, each note a reminder of vigilance, of unseen judgment. He wonders whether they speak in their own language or merely echo the fears and hopes of those who once walked this path. Night falls fully, and the hamlet shrinks into a cluster of flickering lanterns and dim hearths. The fog thickens around the edges, wrapping the village in a protective shroud, or perhaps a warning. Somewhere, a child cries briefly before being hushed, and the sound disappears into the whispering wind. The peddler pushes on, past the last cottage, past the familiar charms and signs of protection, into the forest that waits beyond. Every footstep is deliberate, measured, a rhythm that resonates with the pulse of the village itself. He becomes part of the landscape of superstition, part of the continuum of fear, faith, and survival. The crows land along the path ahead, black silhouettes against the dim glow of twilight. He studies them, feeling the weight of their gaze and the pulse of unseen forces in the forest around him. Smoke from the last village hearths rises and mingles with the fog, bringing the scent of burning herbs and damp earth together in a complex perfume that speaks of life, protection, and the ever-present edge of danger. He lifts the cart and steps forward into the darkness, aware that every movement is both defiance and respect, a negotiation with what has been and what is yet to come. The forest swallows him slowly, the path winding beneath ancient trees, their twisted branches catching the moonlight in fragmented patterns that dance like spirits across the ground. The hamlet behind him exhales in quiet relief, settling into the rhythm of night, of shadows and superstition, of lives held carefully in the balance between the living and the unseen. The fog coils and thickens, the crows wheel above, and somewhere far off, the last bell tolls, slow, solemn, and enduring, reminding all that day yields to night, that safety is temporary, and that survival demands vigilance, belief, and the smallest acts of devotion to forces that will not forgive ignorance. And in the silence that follows, the peddler's silhouette fades into shadow, carrying with him the weight of human caution, the echo of centuries, and the promise of a world where superstition is not a story, but the pulse of existence itself.